because I'm going to install this thermostat now. The thermostat that I have here actually came from Napa because the New Holland one was ridiculous. I think it was something like 40 bucks or something, and I bought this one for like $8. This is actually a Motorrad, well-known name in thermostats, but it's actually a Napa part. For these diesels, you want a 180 degree thermostat, and that's what I have here. The Napa number for this one was 169. You can also get one of these in a 160 degree thermostat, which that's what the gasoline engines want. And those numbers are per the service manual. You can take this out of the box and just throw it in here and probably be fine. However, the original one that was in here had a little hole drilled in it. So I basically mimicked that hole right there. And I just took a 50 thousandths drill bit and just drilled through it. And I drilled through out here because you don't want to drill through in here where your actual seat is. And when I put this in here, I'm going to stick that towards the top. And that's just to help get a little bit of air out of the system to help you bleed it. And when you install these, I typically would take and set the thermostat down into here, which might end up being what I do anyway now that I look at it. But the manual wanted you to put it here, put a gasket, and then your gooseneck. However, if you look at this gooseneck, there's actually a recess there where the thermostat would sit. And I like this way better, so unlike what the manual says, I'm going to do it this way. I don't think it'll affect you either way, just as long as you get it sealed up. So the way that I usually install thermostats, I like to take some RTV and put just a small amount in here just to create a seal. Then I'm going to stick this down in here with my little hole that I drilled straight up, which is going to be about right there. So almost in line with this, because if you remember on the tractor, this points straight up towards the radiator. Ooh. So let's put a little bit of RTV on here. I got my RTV on there. Now when you put this thermostat in, the spring and wax pellet go into your head. So we're going to put the point down into our gooseneck. Okay, now that looks pretty good on my hole there. So now I'm going to take some more silicone and just go around this thing. And try not to be too sloppy with this. I know it's difficult. Now these bolt holes here are blind, so I don't need any kind of sealer on them. Your water pump ones are not. You have to put sealer on your water pump bolts. No, I probably won't put that bolts in there. Okay, the next thing we'll do is take our gasket and just line it up on our bolt holes, and then take just a little bit more RTV. You don't need a lot in this step. You just need enough to help the gasket seal. With the exception of down there where you've actually stuck a thermostat, but yeah, that's different. There's our gooseneck with our thermostat in it and got RTV all on it. It's ready to be bolted down. Take our bolts, and like I say, these are blind. And we'll get our gooseneck put on. And our torque spec, according to the manual, is 5 to 10 foot-pounds. These being 5/16 bolts, probably 10 will be just fine. They shouldn't break a 10. Because 10, as you see, is not a lot. Okay. So now we'll just take a paper towel and wipe up any excess RTV. Okay. So there's our thermostat and gooseneck now installed onto our engine. Okay, so now I'm going to put the injectors back into my engine. There's a couple things I want to point out before I put one of these in. One thing you're going to do first, once they're all clean, and reassembled, is you're going to put a copper washer on them. Now the copper washer that I ended up getting is actually for a later model, like a 65 to 75 Ford 1000 series tractor. They're a little smaller in diameter on their outside, and they're like a smidge smaller thickness, like a thousandth or two, so it shouldn't cause any issue. And the inside is a little bit wider, so it's a little loose on there, but they'll work. The second thing, this right here, the manual doesn't call for any kind of seal on these injectors into the head. However, whenever I had my injectors rebuilt for the 861, the diesel shop sent me some cork gaskets like this, and I put them back on the tractor like that, and I haven't had any issues. Little cork gaskets here that come with the 1000 series washers are real thick and really hard. So I just used a template and made some out of some 1/8 inch cork rubber gasket material. And like I said, I haven't seen any adverse side effects or anything on my 861. This copper washer right here, I have just a little bit of engine assembly grease on it just to help hold it on there. Now before I put the injector into the head, I've got to put the seal into it. The little guy that slides right there. And I noticed that on this head, there's actually a groove cut in here. And there's a groove on these. The 861 did not have this, so I guess they updated it. However, I still like to put a little bit of RTV on there. Not a lot, just enough to help seal it up a little bit. And I just put a little bit around that little ridge. And I'm going to slide it onto the injector. So now I'm going to take the injector assembly These are a little tricky to get these rubber seals in here, since your injector's going at an angle down and these are going straight, so you got to kind of push and pull in two different directions here. But you want to get this injector as far as you can down with just your hands. Now that I have that injector in, I'm going to go ahead and put the bolts in it and tighten it down. And these bolts don't get any kind of lock washers or anything. And they get torqued to 15 foot-pounds. And don't torque down one side and then go back to the other. Kind of pull them down evenly. Okay, just double checking everything. And then the last thing is come in here and wipe off your extra silicone. Okay, so that injector is now installed. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other three. And you see the little rubber gasket, or not rubber gasket, rubber cork gasket sticking out right here. It's very minimal. It's just there to try to keep some oil from getting down inside the injector. Alright, I got all the injectors installed, so now we're ready to put the leak off tube on it. Each one of these injectors I rebuilt. And I'm going to have a separate video on how to go about rebuilding these. To install our excess fuel line, our leak off line, whatever you want to call it, I call it a leak off line. First thing you're going to do is take all these little bolts off the top and remove any of the washers. There should be 2 washers, per injector. Alright, so there's a couple things to note here before we put this leak off line on. The first thing being, inspect your leak off tube. These things were known to crack because it's just some stuff soldered together. And I've looked at mine, I've flow tested it with some brake cleaner, and everything seems okay. When we install this, we have a flare fitting up here at the front of the head. However, it does not connect to another flare fitting. It instead has a little seal. And this seal, even New Holland today, still available with the original 311410 part number. It's basically just a little piece of rubber hose, but it's kind of like, do you want to do this job twice, just buy the seals, considering it's like $7. Put the seal down in there and then just push the tube down into it. So my injector seal kit that I bought off the later models comes with aluminum instead of copper. Either one will work. It's not an issue to use one over the other. Go ahead and put some of them on these bolts here. What you want is you want these little washers to be on both sides of your tube. We'll take our bolt with our washer, stick it into our tube, and put the other washer on. Then we'll just kind of ease this thing down a little bit to try to get a thread started on our injector. Okay. We'll go to our next one. Same scenario. Put our bolt in it. Lift it up just enough to slide our washer in. We'll get it started. And we'll do that for the last 2. And let's go ahead and start getting our flare fitting started. And this will be somewhat tight since you're going to be pushing down on a piece of rubber. Just don't cross thread it, because you can tell the difference between just pushing on a piece of rubber and actually cross threading something. Let's run these guys down now. Just finger tight. And you got to kind of be careful here, because if any of this sticks, you could run the risk of breaking a solder joint. And there's no torque specs on any of this, so it's just all by feel. See, this one you want to be snug. But you gotta think we're compressing that rubber in there to make a seal. And the same goes for these guys. There's no torque spec. However, don't sit here and just honk down on them, because there again, you can flex this and break it. I usually take my thumb and I'll hold it here and then just kind of like support the tube. And you're going to tighten them down. Like so. Like I say, it's all feel. You don't want to tighten them so tight that you start tweaking your line, but you got to have them tight enough that they're not going to leak. So this is low pressure, but it can still cause problems. Okay, so there's our injectors installed back into our engine. Alright, so back over here at the workbench. We'll go ahead and get this gasket put on here. So I can figure out how it goes on. It goes like that. Okay, so there's, you can get these holes punched out. Alright, so whenever I put these gaskets on, just like I've done on the engine itself, I put a little bit of silicone on here. And that's just to help aid it in sealing. This gasket only line up one way, so you can't mess it up. Like I said, I'm just going to put a little bit of silicone on here, just a really small amount. It's actually more than I was wanting, but it'll work. So I'll set the gasket on here. And we'll put some more silicone around this side. Hopefully not near as much. Depends on how much this thing wants to squirt out at me. You don't have to do the silicone if you don't want to. It's just one of my personal preferences. Okay, so now we're going to stick our cover plate back on. And our 3 backing plate screws. And I didn't clean them up or anything. It's just kind of pointless too, and plus I just didn't really have time. Tighten these things up. Okay, there we go. And while I got it sitting here, I'm just going to go ahead and wipe off some of the excess silicone. Okay, so here's the next gasket, which is actually going to go here and then in between, or back onto the engine block. So I'm going to go ahead and silicone this down here, and then I'll carry this over to the motor and we'll get it put on the motor. Okay. So now we're ready to go stick this onto the engine. Okay, now on this engine, these 3 holes are not blind, therefore they go into the coolant passage. So you need to put some kind of a thread sealer on these bolts before you put them in, or you will have a leak. Go ahead and take the pump and get it bolted down. Okay, I gotta go look up the torque spec for these, but these are probably going to be 10 to 15 foot-pounds. I'm ready to torque these bolts down, and it is 10 to 15 foot-pounds. So I'm probably just going to go on the bottom end since these are the old originals. Go about 10 foot-pounds. Okay, now we got them all torqued down. Okay, so now that I got the water pump put on here, it's cleaning up a little bit extra silicone, which I really don't think there is too much. So now the only thing I have left to do, as far as putting the engine together is concerned, is my valve train.